Thanks, Chris. So first of all, I'm going to go a little off script right at the beginning. I want to just say thanks for everybody for joining. This conference has been really great to see a lot of faces that I haven't seen before, and I'm really psyched to have you all here to talk about MDR and IVDR. I really am psyched to be moderating this session. I think all of us were hoping by this point in our lives that have been involved in this that we would no longer have to talk about this and it would just be done. But unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe it's job security, we are. So we're here to talk about MDR, IVDR, some of the implementation strategies that we've all been using. And this group of panelists span a broad range of experience and backgrounds, so I think they will be able to provide some really great insights from various perspectives on MDR and the implementation, some of the challenges and strategies they've been using. So I'm going to stop there and let each of them introduce themselves so you can get an idea of their backgrounds and what their perspectives are. All right, Kate.
All right, hi everybody. So I'm Kate Benedict. So I am the panel member who does not have a regulatory or quality background. So I am your token general manager to provide the commercial perspective of how, when I was running our vascular access business for BD right here in Utah, the decisions we had to make around exploring, moving from MBD to MDR.
Hi, I'm Karli Plenary. I'm Director of Regulatory Affairs for bioMérieux over the BioFire product line. I currently have a team that focuses on U.S. submissions, lifecycle management, and OUS regulatory submissions, as well as EU and IVDR transition.
Hi, Rob Becker, Vice President of Quality at Edwards Lifesciences. And I've actually got my perspective is as head of quality for our manufacturing site down in Draper, really working on our quality system deployment, understanding what was going to change, how we needed to incorporate that, all the things that were going to be different, and how to get prepared for that.
Hello, I'm Victor Garcia, and Kate, no, you exactly have a lot of influence in how these businesses make decisions, and we'll talk about that in a couple of questions. Yeah, I'm the Global Vice President for Varex Imaging. Been doing this for almost 30 years, I can't believe it, and I fell into regulatory, so I, like Jessica, was hoping that MDR, IVDR were acronyms of the past, but they're still right in front of us, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm delighted to be here to share my thoughts and insights that and pain points. There's still a couple of pain points going on.
All right, thanks everybody. So as you can see, there's going to be some very good perspective on what we're going to be talking about with regard to MDR and IVDR. I will readily admit that I am not an IVDR expert, so I will be deferring to the panel for some of those questions and comments. The first topic, though, that I'd like to talk about is the extensions, right? I think this is maybe not if you think about the most important, but I think it's what everybody's been thinking about a lot, and that's the extensions that with the legislative changes that just occurred in March of this year. So if you're not familiar, I'll just run through kind of the general gist of what these legislative changes were, and that is for MDR, medical devices, right? If you have a Class 3 or Class 2B device, you've received an extension or can get an extension to 2027. If you have Class 1, that requires notified body interaction, Class 2A and Class 2B non-implantable, you have till 2028. It also removed the sell-off period, right, that we had from 24 to 25, which allows us to continue selling our products. We all know this is really not a free lunch, though, and so there's a lot of requirements around self-declaring. For IVDRs, and again, I'll let those that are the experts in this, but I do know that those were also extended to various time points, also through 2028, based on the classification of those devices as well. So with that, what I'd like to start maybe with Kate here, because I think it'll be really great to have the commercial perspective on when the legislative changes came about and we all learned that we were going to get these extensions. How would you say those extensions impacted the business and really the company on the whole, both from a kind of a positive and potentially negative perspective?
Sure. So, one of the things to kind of start with is, we were actually ready. Like, we didn't need the extension. So as a commercial leader, I'll tell you, like, I'm a little disappointed in the extension because we felt we had a competitive advantage. Like, we were ready to go. We had done all the work. So now the playing field's gonna be a little bit differently in a few years. The other thing that, we really have to think about is we had staffed and funded a huge team of people, a few of them are in the room today, a huge team to really focus on this for us. But now with the extension, there's still going to be some ongoing work, and now we have to figure out, well, how are we going to continue to fund this team? It's going to require, in some cases, moving the budget to different departments than maybe they were currently funded, and and that's a constant challenge when there's a battle for the budget. But overall, I mean, we're excited and we're ready to go. But the one thing I'll just say in general with this is, doing business in Europe is a lot harder now. And it really is going to be very strategic for us and many companies to say, we're not going to maybe launch in Europe first anymore like we once did.
No, those are really good points. And I'm going to follow up on that second point you made in just a minute. But Karli, if you want to maybe talk about this perspective from the IVDR space, and I think, Rob, you have some insights there as well, and Victor.
Yeah, so we are actually very grateful for the extension. But we also have been working on our IVDR transition since the draft of IVDR came out, so 2016, 2017, working very hard. But one of the hard things with IVDR was that products under IVDD, probably about 80% of the products didn't have to be reviewed by a notified body prior to IVDR. So there was a huge paradigm shift when IVDR came out, where you went from only 20% of the products being reviewed to now 80% of the products having to be reviewed. So a lot of manufacturers who have never dealt with a notified body before are now having to, one, have to get a notified body, and two, have to figure out how to go through a review with a notified body. And a lot of diagnostic companies are smaller. So that was hard, and that was hard to find budget for that. Thankfully for us, we had products that already had to be reviewed by a notified body, and we already had a notified body. Another thing that was hard is that a lot of notified bodies dropped the ability to review under IVDR or MDR as well. So we also staffed up, we prepped a lot, and we are still also waiting for a lot of the competent authorities to come up with regulations surrounding common specifications for IVDs, and we're waiting for a release of the European reference labs, which is something that is specific to IVDs, which has been really frustrating, which is why we are grateful for the extensions. So, thank you.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things I think we recognized early as we started working on the quality system, all the gaps to MDR, and recognize, things like labeling changes, clinical data, clinical evaluation. A lot of the things that were changing with the MDR, we worked on our system side first while we were getting clarity on, some of the product submission type things. And I think that worked well because we could get that foundation out of the way. We knew what the gaps were, we addressed them, but then we also knew what some of the gaps would be as we started. We have, various classifications of devices, and so some we have to be upfront on, and some we can take advantage of the extensions. But we had a much better idea of what we needed, where our gaps were, and we could be more prepared. And getting the quality system, all those elements out of the way just made everything easier so you could focus on, the product side and the submissions, because those are all unique. And the with MDR, there's expert panels and some other things that were added that make that whole process a little more ambiguous, and/or there's pieces of it that your notified body just can't approve things anymore. It has to go, and so we at least knew we were in the right direction, and we were better able to respond if there were questions there. So I think separating the two and preparing ourselves up front so the quality system was complete, and then focusing on and working through the submission details worked well.
Great, thanks. Victor, do you want to add?
Just real quick, a couple things on my former life. I did IVDs as well, so I could really appreciate the extension as well. But it's a double-edged sword because now with the extensions, we were going fast and furious with our reviews. Now they just seem to naturally just take longer. Round 2 comes, round 3, you start getting really worried. Okay, I'm gonna have to get back on the queue. So that's a double-edged sword. The other thing I want to add is I think the EC, they had to do the extensions. There's, as you said, Karli, there's only 4 IVDR certified notified bodies, 4 for the world. And almost every market, every company wants to be in the big EU market. Who wouldn't? So that's, I think, a complexity that they have to consider, and we're all kind of going through it too. And we have, 20, I think, for MDR designated today. That's still not enough for all the manufacturers and all the product that needs to go into that market. So I think that's what we're all struggling with. So the extensions, I think, was prudent, but now there's other pain points that we're going through because 3 of my 5 big portfolios are done. 2 are lagging behind because of this. They took their foot off the gas, I guess, to put it another way, a little bit.
Yeah, no, understood. Those are great points. On that same topic of the extensions, I know that there's a lot of companies that are still kind of going through the decision process of what products to discontinue potentially or obsolesce. One thing I note, the extensions, clearly were an effort to keep products on the market and available for patients in the EU. However, what we find is that the remediation still costs what it costs. And if you have low revenue products, potentially, right, there's decisions that are going into whether or not those products should be continued on that market. So I'd be curious to hear from the panel what the decision process has been to determine when products should be obsolete, should they not be obsolete, and what are those kind of points that you consider when you make those decisions? So I don't know if you, go ahead, Kate.
Sure. So, we looked at it really strategically, and our goal was really to ensure that we weren't just solving the immediate, challenge. We were actually setting it up so that it would be sort of a living document and that we could, as the portfolio changed in the future, we set ourselves up for success. So a couple of things. The first and foremost, we undertook a huge program around portfolio simplification before we even did this. It was part of a bigger initiative that BD called Project Recode, but it was a bigger initiative that we had, but that was critically important. Then we obviously look strategically at, okay, it's not just really the EU we have to think about. We have to look at the countries that look at the CE mark and leverage that, and, how does that impact the decision there? And then, it very much, this is where the commercial lens came. We made difficult decisions where we absolutely chose not to move down the MDR path with certain products because the cost of the clinical trial would have exceeded the revenue that we would have returned. And in the day and age of just constrained resources, you have to have a business mind around that. So that's where that comment earlier I made where it's getting more difficult to do business in Europe. I mean, it absolutely is, and we are not going to have as broad of a portfolio anymore, but we're going to have the right portfolio to treat the patients. Like, that was critically important. We didn't pull out of anything that would have left a gap for patient care.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in?
No, I think, the big thing with some of our newer, updates to products, they may be a next generation, et cetera, we chose to accelerate the MDR submission for those as opposed to maybe going back and trying to bring an older product up to speed. And so those trade-offs certainly are important where you're making, future investments and maybe just getting out ahead of and getting earlier on some of the newer products. But then also rationalizing similar what fits in what markets, and a lot of times there's substitutions that you can work with your teams to market and probably adequately support the space, but it may not be exactly how it is today. So what are those substitutions? How do you communicate? How do you get your marketing and field teams aligned with that?
One of the things we looked at for our products, especially for Class D under IVDR, One of the specialty things that you now have to do with Class D products under IVDR is they require batch verification, which is new for a lot of IVDR or IVD manufacturers. Is we looked at what kind of revenue do those products generate, and surprisingly, some of those didn't generate a lot. So, like, my first thing is, well, like, cut them. We don't need to do that. It seems like a lot of effort for not that much revenue. But our marketing teams went out and did an analysis, and they found that, like, if you look at our whole portfolio, they actually add value. Like, hospitals actually go with our product line because they want that entire portfolio with that, maybe that one product that maybe doesn't generate that much revenue, but they will choose us over other companies because we have this one analyte that maybe someone else doesn't. So we move forward with Class D so that we can capture business as a whole.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to more of kind of the submission area of UMDR and some of the pain points that people are seeing. Just so you know, some of you may have seen this, the EU Commission has actually done a couple surveys. There hasn't been one recently that would capture the impact of the legislative extensions. However, in the end of March, so it was published a little after that, what they're showing is that 82% of MDR applications are taking 13 to 18 months to get through the approval process plus the QMS certification, okay? And for IVDRs, 60% of applications are also taking 13 to 18 months to get through that entire process. And so they also actually, in the survey, looked at what are the reasons submissions are either getting rejected or taking longer. And the reasons for rejection really are incomplete submissions for MDR as one of the primary reasons. Sometimes they're out of scope of what the notified body can actually review, and that's actually one of the key reasons for IVDRs as well. So my question is, on the submission side, what have been, one, are you seeing that the 13 to 18 months is pretty accurate? Are you seeing longer, shorter, and what are the primary pain points that you're seeing with your submissions?
So if I could jump in, yes, it's pretty accurate. And then depending on the portfolio, going back to the previous conversation on obsolescence, you have to make a call in midstream sometimes. All right, this is just not going to happen in the due diligence that we wanted, and to achieve, it's a business in some cases, right? I know hopefully it doesn't affect lives, but if there's, the rationale is also if there's other products that are out there, then you're not making that kind of crucial decision. So submissions are taking 18 plus. I could tell you that now, at least that's what we're experiencing now. And the key pain points are just interpretation. It's new for the reviewers. It's new for industry. Article 7, the whole Article 7 about your claims. They're revisiting all the claims that you have for all your promotional material. They all should have been aligned to MDD, going into MDR, using that as the example. But then there's this Article 61, 6110. Anybody know these numbers? So 6110 is about getting exemptions.
But we're all impressed that you do.
No, meaning because I'm living it right now. That's why. Don't be too impressed. It's about getting exemptions. And what is the definition of soda, state-of-the-art versus wet? Well-established technology. You go down a path, and then you get challenged going down a path with our quote-unquote legacy products that we all had, right, before MDR. So that's what we're dealing with on even the definition of what WET means and the scope of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else?
Well, I think the addition of expert panels, we're more used to, and you could work with your notified body
Kinda like
directly.
us.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Like us.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's these layers in the process now that are, you get questions back, but they're not direct from your notified body, and so, and there's layers of the approval that are hidden, and so it's just, you have to be patient and realize that it's going to be not as straightforward as it was previously, and be prepared for and know that you're answering questions that are going through somebody to somebody else, and just have to have a little patience, and there's definitely some ambiguity to it.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the other things that I would say that I have struggled with through my journey of EU MDR is there's a lot of information out there, right? You've got the EU Commission, you've got MedTech Europe, you've got even AdvaMed, you've got MDCG guidance, you've got all the notified bodies putting out different information. And my question to the panel really is, how are you managing the information that comes in terms of dissemination to people within the company, determining what they need to know and when they need to know it and who needs to know it? When do you take an MDCG guidance and say that's actually going to stick and actually be applied versus not? So how are those decisions being made, and how are you managing that dissemination, or at least understanding of the information that's coming in?
Very carefully. No. No, all seriousness, it's hard because there's tools to give you that intel, you know, we call that regulatory intel, right, in the throw of it. And which one do you sort through? How do you sift through it? One day I wish we have, I know that's a topic for later, right, Chris, AI and regulatory affairs. I think there's tools that could help a regulatory professional do their job more. But right now it's literally legwork, people reading a lot of documents, making a call, making an interpretation based on their experience. And then you decide, all right, let's not create a lot of noise in the organization, but let's roll out these key things, and then that's part of our strategy to educate the organization. And there's tools, training tools to go through that. But it's still very complicated because sometimes, just going back to my comment from before, the definition of one notified body of WT is different than another notified body, and we had conflict even in our decision-making based on that. And the other thing that, to add to that, MDCGs, you know, if you read the front page of every MDCG guidance document, basically, it says this is not enforceable, this is not, but they're enforcing these things. Let me just be very blunt. They're enforcing every line item in that. You should follow this on that MDCG 2020-6 and 20-13. Yeah, I remember those two. But it's not easy, but it is learning by doing.
Thanks. Anybody else?
One thing that's been difficult for us in IVDs is that they're focusing on the MDR guidances first, especially the MDCG group. And so going to notified bodies, them, when we ask for guidance, our notified body will be like, oh, we'll just use this guidance. And we'll say, well, that's for MDR. And they go, yeah, it's the same, basically, so follow that one. So we go and try to fit it the best we can to IVDR, and then the IVDR one will come out, and then they expect us to immediately switch over to the IVDR one, which is like kind of the same but a little bit different. So it's been hard to balance trying to go through all the MDR ones, then also having to switch to the IVDR ones and make the call for what applies to MDR, what doesn't apply to us, and what do we actually implement, and when do we think the IVDR one is going to come out. And again, different notified bodies are requiring different things, and our company, we have 2 different notified bodies. And so one side of the company, their notified body is expecting very different things than our notified body. So having to discuss with them and meet in the middle to actually try to figure out like what the heck we're supposed to do has been a little bit interesting. So,
Thank you. Anybody else, Kate? Nope. Okay. So one of the things I actually want to touch on that particular point is there is an MDCG guidance about exemptions. Has anybody in the room actually applied for exemptions for their products? Okay. I'm seeing nobody.
Would you like to?
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody.
The point I want to make is there's an MDCG guidance that actually indicates or encourages the member states to actually harmonize their approach, and they're anything but harmonized. So I think that one of the issues we're seeing is exactly what you said, Karli, and what we're seeing is they might say something, but the member states and notified bodies might be following it, but there's also cases in which they're not following it at all. And so it does become very tricky to manage. I'm going to move on to some of the most significant changes with EU MDR, one of which is post-market surveillance, vigilance reporting requirements, and then the other one is around the need for clinical data. Now, we all probably, anybody who's been working in this area know that the MDD required clinical data. Most of us got away with no clinical data or rationales for not having clinical data. So even for products that have been on the market for many, many years are now requiring clinical data, and our indications for use and our intended purpose are also at risk of changing, which means that there's a trickle-down effect, not only in the EU for marketing materials and labeling, but outside the EU if you have registrations based on those CE marks. So I'm going to turn it back over to the panel to talk about how they're managing the clinical data requirements. Have they seen any significant changes to their labeling, and how is that being managed as well? Yeah.
Sure, I can start. A couple of things, and it's so real, right? So, one of the products that comes to mind that we were dealing with this is, we had a product in the European market which was preferred there, but it wasn't necessarily preferred outside of the European market. But the data that we had, when we think about it from a global perspective, we had much more data for the product that was preferred in the US market. And so it came down to return on investment again. So if we were to conduct brand new trials, it wouldn't have made any sense, where we could have leveraged some survey data, leveraging the US code, and that's the decision that we made. And I'll tell you, our European colleagues aren't thrilled with us. Like, they have a few years where they can now work to upgrade from the product that is preferred in their market to this new SKU, but that's just a real example. The other thing on intended use, we really had to think about some of the, what is the regulatory term, maybe subcategories or subclasses, I may not have that right, but like neonatal, we're a catheter business, and when you think about neonatal use, we had to really think about, are we gonna actually do a trial just to get use in neonates? No, we just chose to put a black box warning on it and say, you know what, it's okay, that it's such a minor risk, there are other solutions on the market, so there were no patients that were at risk. And then the third thing I think you talked about, just any kind of changes. One of the things with us as a catheter business was dwell time of some of our catheters. And the data that we had was up to 30 days or something along those lines. And then we really had to think through, how are we going to support that data? We had some data that supported it in different ways. But then there was also, if the trade-off, and this is where our medical affairs team had to get involved, the trade-off of saying, well, let's just say I'm making this up now, this isn't real data, but let's just say we reduce that to 10 days. Well, then what's the risk to the patient of actually changing out a catheter at 10 days versus just leaving it in and letting it do what it's doing? And so medical affairs had to get involved to really think through all that. So it was quite complex. We had, thank goodness, we had a very collaborative team, and I think that's the secret of regulatory, quality, medical affairs, commercial, all getting together and talking about the various points of view.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add their perspectives?
No, I think the biggest change that we had to make for MDR is the clinical data and the evaluation of it, what you're comparing to and how you're coming to your conclusions. And it was definitely more data than we were used to, even for some of the higher risk devices that we make. And so getting adjusted to that, and then in some cases, having to go back and start to plan out how do we get this data for the devices where it doesn't exist? What's the structure we need? And definitely that's been a big part of planning some of the submissions. So it's definitely good to understand that up front, so you know what you're getting into and can be thoughtful about how to navigate it.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
I'll say one thing. For us, we had, thankfully, some of our devices, we did have all of the clinical trial data, but they were done pre-IVDR. So we updated all of our clinical reports and input a table that traced all of the IVDR clinical requirements, and basically created a trace matrix for the reviewers so that they could easily see how, even though this was done pre-IVDR, how they applied. For our other side of the company, they had very old devices they had to decide if they were going to initiate new clinical trials or change their intended uses. And then that did have an extreme trickle-down effect because they were registered all over the world, and they had to initiate change projects and build up a team to create that, and they are still working on those projects and effects to not only change the labeling and the intended use, but also re-register all over the world.
Great, thank you. This is a little bit of a surprise question. It's not going to be hard, though, I promise. One of the things, as I think every company I've been at since MDR started, IVDR started, has managed the program a little differently. But every company has really seen that it requires oversight by somebody. And that oftentimes is somebody outside of regulatory, right? Sometimes it's a program manager. In my role now, I'm an executive sponsor, and then we have program managers, and so there's many layers. The other thing that we find is that companies are approaching the resourcing to do remediation and submissions a little differently. So I've seen companies with upwards of 200 plus contractors to companies that are using mostly in-house. And so the question I have for the group is, at your companies, how have you been resourcing the remediation submissions, and then how have you been determining when you, kind of that inflection point of when you transfer those contractors to full-time people, and what is that ratio to make sure that you're maintaining state-of-the-art down the road?
I'll jump in. So, yes, when we were talking about this in 2019, 2018, what is 2020, before COVID hit and the pandemic, everything hit, we were already ramping up. This is what it's looked like. This is the scope before the first extension to 2021. The ratio, it's 2 to 1. 2 versus 1 today, 2 tomorrow at minimum, from a strictly regulatory sustainability perspective. And that's all part of the budget planning process. And COVID kind of changed everything and changed the mindset of how we do this going forward. And that also has to be built into your design and development processes going forward. Regulatory strategies is not just a document that just sits there. It's a living document, as most of us know in this profession. And that includes the resource, the capabilities. So, yeah, it was quite significant. It was a shocker for our CFO.
Interesting. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things we decided is to manage things internally as much as possible. And so we basically have a small team, 2 to 3 people that are our MDR subject matter experts. They sort of do all that, what's going on, what are we learning? And then we had a project manager assigned. We went through a whole, we treated it just like we would a, significant program, build work streams around it, budgeted for it. And then the actual submissions fall to each of the product teams. So we're doing a similar approach, which is minimizing. We're trying to use all the internal knowledge we have, keep that focused, because essentially these are critical transitions. And so prioritizing where we need to, but minimizing the number of contractors just because of the inefficiency and the cost.
That makes sense.
For us, I think we used a combination of internal and consultants. But, I'm not sure about the accounting of it all, but we were able to resource this and fund it what we call below the line. So it's below where many of us are measured in terms of our performance. More of how you would handle like a restructuring or something along those lines. So that really helped because that enabled us to be able to get the funding for the contractors that we needed. But now, because we thought we'd be done. And so now with this extension, now we're in the process of bringing those resources back up into the P&L where we're all measured. And this is where it becomes a very real business trade-off because I'll just make an example. Like we have a platform team that makes decisions about everything to do with the platform, bringing new products to market. Well, this just becomes one more expense that has to be done. And we may have to say, gosh, we might not bring that new product to market right now because I need to put that funding in to some regulatory and quality resources to ensure that we finish this program. So it's going to really make the commercial leaders' decisions much more challenging. And that's where I'm saying, I said up front, that cost of doing business in Europe is so different now, and it may ultimately, I don't know, it may ultimately hurt the European market by adding these more stringent challenges to bring products to market, because if the return's not there, the resources are going to go someplace else.
No, that totally makes sense. All right, we're getting close to time, and we have a few minutes for questions. So if there are questions from the audience. Yes. Great. Good luck.
I'm looking for help to 510K submissions and getting up to speed on the manufacturing practices. There are consultants or companies in the room.
Anybody need a job? This panel discussion has taken a turn. No, actually, I don't mean to laugh. It's actually, seriously, I mean, it's great that you're, yes, it's very overwhelming. I would absolutely agree with that.
Another observation, your discussion go along with the guy that said, oh yeah, this was FDR guy, then the FDA guy, yeah, companies are coming to the US first. Go US.
That's right.
That's why.
Yeah, well, and there are countries that are now accepting 510Ks or looking to as well that didn't before. So, I think from the EU perspective, they're definitely looking at all of this, yes, very closely. Eric, I see you. You're looking for work? I'll turn that over to the panel. Go ahead if anybody.
Frankly, those discussions do happen they happen right before the due dates. Hey, let's choose the right notified body. I think the jury's still out, I mean, at least for my company, of how that goes, because the extension, again, going to my comment earlier, the brakes just stopped on a lot of these good cadence of reviews. And then you get all these curveballs. I was like, where did that come from? I mean, show me where it says in the regulations this. And you start getting down to those details. So they have to realize that, yes, they're not consultants, but there is a healthcare partnership going on here as well. That's not necessarily always financial. There's a benefit-risk ratio that they have to accept at some point, be it more clinical trials or be it more data, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think there's also an important, it's hard to determine exactly when to make that switch. Sometimes there's an inflection point. We had a situation where we had divested some part of a product line to another company, and we kept some of it, and we thought, well, maybe this is the time to make that switch. And MDR sometimes is a good time to make that switch, but if you have other things going on, like you're changing a legal manufacturer at the same time, then it gets a little tricky. But it's a really good point. And I've also seen that some of the notified bodies that we're probably aware, it's 3 rounds and you're out. Some of them don't have any limit on those rounds. I naively thought at the beginning that everybody was using the 3-round rule, and they're not. And so, it's hard to navigate. And I think, I think we have 4 notified bodies we work with, and so it does get tricky.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to navigate, is it the notified body or is it the process itself? And I think it's maybe not clear in all cases yet, and so, we're continuing, we use more than one notified body, so sharing those experiences and trying to learn and do that comparison. But I'm not sure we're 100% clear on, how much of it is the notified body, how much is it the MDR process, and where in between. And so I think we'll continue to learn and, make decisions accordingly.
Any other, yes? I'm sorry, specifically on that last part? Right. Somebody want to take that?
Are you MDR or IVDR?
Well, it could relate to IVDR. No.
We've gotten similar questions under IVDR, and so I can answer how we answer, but I don't know if it necessarily applies to MDR. So what we say, so we are infectious disease diagnostics, and we generally say that we look across a wide array of genomes, and so it applies to all, to the EU population because it's done in the same intended use environment that is similar to the EU population. And the bugs or the genetic makeup of our primers are the same as the same bugs that would be in the EU population. And then we give them a whole spiel of how our primer design works and basically argue that it's the same as what our clinical trial sites were, and then we show them what our clinical trial sites were, and they're generally set in diverse areas of the United States, so they're not just getting one population. And that has worked up until this point. And we've gotten that question in other areas of the world too. We get that in Asia and in Latin America as well. And that's the argument that we generally use. I don't know if that would work for
I was
MDR.
saying, wow, I wish I could use that argument. It's a very good argument. and I'd like to use the technical term spiel. That's a good one. No, I want to go back to the challenges to answer your question from us is the leaning on all the non-clinical data. We have years, my current company, 75 years of data, imaging data. So even that, wrapping it up in a nice bowl, good statistics behind it, they're still asking for some clinical data. You need to relook at this. So that's kind of where we're at currently on some of our products. And that's also a commercial decision. Are we going to push forward? All right, here's the bill of what's it going to cost to get more data in this market. So we're going through that challenge.
Great. I think, can we take one more question? All right, we got the okay.
So I work for Nelson Labs testing laboratory, and we saw before the change, mass rush testing, right? Because companies had things below the line. Now that things are moving to the top of the line, do you think that people will wait longer to get closer to that 28 state to do more work, or will it just be staggered? The good news is we have more
Yeah, well, I'm going to turn it over. Go ahead, Rob.
No, I think you're going to see it staggered. I mean, I think some people are going to realize I should take advantage of the extension and, it makes sense. I've got enough of a justification to move forward. And then I think you're going to see, a series that sit and wait and or, ultimately they may be having problems with the justification. And so you're going to wait as long as possible. So I think you'll see a little bit of both, but probably a little bit of metering.
All right, that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you to the panelists for being here and your insights. It's incredibly insightful for everybody.